The California sun burned hot over Navy SEAL training base. The air was thick with salt and adrenaline, and the sound of boots striking concrete echoed through the courtyard. Dozens of cadets stood in perfect formation, sweat glistening on their foreheads. They'd all heard the rumor, today, the instructors were going to break someone. But no one expected it to be Lieutenant. She wasn't just any officer. She was a legend whispered about in the halls, the first woman in her unit to earn a trident. Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, she'd been there all. Stories said she'd led missions that went sideways and still brought her men home. To the cadets, she wasn't just tough, she was untouchable. That morning, however, the rules changed. Chief Instructor stepped out, his presence like thunder. "Today's test," he barked, "is psychological warfare. You'll simulate a high-stress capture scenario. Lieutenant will act as the target. Your goal, break her composure." A few cadets exchanged glances. Break her composure. They'd seen the way she stared through people, calm, focused, unshakable. Some smirked. Others looked nervous. Didn't flinch. She just gave a single nod, hands clasped behind her back. "Understood, Chief." Moments later, the simulation began. The cadets dragged her into a dim training room, concrete walls and flickering lights setting the stage. They played their parts, shouting, shoving, tying her wrists. It was all pretend, until adrenaline started to take over. One cadet, Davis, whispered, "Man, she's not even reacting." "Then push harder," another snapped. "We're supposed to get a reaction." Sat blindfolded, silent. Her breathing was steady. Her posture never wavered. Every insult, every shove, every fake threat rolled off her like rain. She'd faced real enemies who didn't hesitate to kill. These kids were nothing compared to that. Still, the drill pushed on. "Talk," a cadet shouted, slamming a hand on the table. Tilted her head slightly. "You done?" she said coolly. That answer, soft, almost amused, triggered something in them. One of the younger cadets, hot-headed and eager to impress, glanced at the prop table. There, among ropes and fake radios, lay a training pistol. "Let's see her stay calm now," he muttered under his breath. Before anyone could stop him, he grabbed it. Cold metal gleamed under the light. It wasn't real, but it looked real. And that was enough. He stepped forward, heart pounding, and pressed it against forehead. The room went dead silent. Even the air seemed to freeze. His jaw tightened. She couldn't see through the blindfold, but she felt the weapon's touch. Instantly, she was somewhere else, thousands of miles away, in a dusty Afghan alley, the sound of shouting and gunfire surrounding her. The smell of smoke, blood, and fear. A real gun. A real man who'd wanted her dead. Her pulse quickened, but her voice didn't tremble. "Take that thing off me," she said quietly. The cadet laughed nervously. "Relax, ma'am, it's not." "Now." Her tone changed, cold, commanding, the kind that cut through chaos. Every cadet froze. Even the one holding the pistol felt his stomach drop. The blindfold hid her eyes, but somehow they all felt her stare. The instructor, watching from the observation window, leaned forward, eyes wide. He knew that tone. Wasn't acting anymore, she was in survival mode. The cadet's hand trembled. It's fake." Too late. Moved like lightning. In one swift motion, she turned her head, broke the wrist grip, and had the cadet's arm twisted behind his back before he could blink. The pistol clattered to the ground. He gasped, pinned against the table. The others stumbled backward, stunned. Pulled off her blindfold, eyes sharp, breathing controlled. She looked around slowly, then down at the trembling cadet. "Lesson 1, she said in a low, steady voice. "Never aim a weapon you don't understand." She released him, tossed the pistol aside, and walked out without another word. The room stayed silent for a full minute before anyone dared move. No one smirked, no one whispered. Because in that instant they finally understood, you don't test a Navy SEAL's composure. You respect it. The silence after walked out was suffocating. No one dared to speak. The only sound was the faint echo of her boots fatting down the hallway. The cadets just stood there, frozen, wide-eyed, their adrenaline still burning. The young man who'd held the pistol, Cadet Blake, was trembling. His hands shook as he stared at the training weapon lying on the ground. It looked harmless now, a piece of metal. But a few seconds ago, it had been a death sentence, not for her, but for his own career. The instructor's voice shattered the stillness. Everyone out, now. Boots scraped the floor as they rushed out into the sunlight. The California air hit like a slap, but it didn't help. Every one of them knew this wasn't just another drill gone wrong. They had crossed a line, and lines don't blur in the military. Minutes later, the door opened again. Lieutenant stepped out, calm, composed, as if nothing had happened. She walked past the group without looking at anyone. Her uniform was spotless, her face expressionless, but her silence spoke volumes. Chief followed behind her, jaw tight. He stopped in front of the cadets, arms crossed. "You think this is a game?" he thundered. "You think a SEAL drill means you can lose control?" His voice echoed across the yard. "If that weapon had been real, you'd be facing a court-martial or worse." No one answered. Glare swept over them. You're lucky Lieutenant didn't react the way combat veterans are trained to, because if she had, he paused, letting the weight of his words hang heavy, you wouldn't be standing. Blake swallowed hard. His throat felt dry as sandpaper. He wanted to apologize, to say it was a mistake, that he didn't mean harm, but the truth was he didn't know what he meant. He acted out of pride, out of arrogance. He wanted to prove himself. And now he'd humiliated the one person everyone respected most. Later that afternoon, the cadets were called into the briefing room. The lights were dim, the air thick with tension. Stood at the front, her expression unreadable. She looked over the group for a long moment before speaking. "When I was in Kandahar," she began softly, "a man pointed a gun at me. Same distance, same sound, same silence." Every head lifted, even looked uneasy. "He pulled the trigger," continued. "The gun jammed. If it hadn't, I wouldn't be standing here." The room was dead quiet. "So when one of you pressed that barrel to my head today," she said, her voice calm but steady, "you didn't just break training protocol. You took me back there, back to that moment. That's not something I ever expected, especially not from people I'm here to teach." Blake felt a lump rise in his throat. He wanted to disappear. Stepped closer, looking each cadet in the eye. "You think toughness is about proving dominance, about showing who's fearless. It's not. Toughness is control, control over fear, over anger, over power." She stopped right in front of Blake. Her gaze didn't waver. "You failed that today." He couldn't look at her. Then her tone softened slightly. "But failure can be a teacher if you let it be." No one moved. The tension eased just a little, but the weight of her words remained. Turned toward the door. Before leaving, she added quietly, "Tomorrow morning, you'll report to me for field duty. We're going to relearn what discipline really means." The door shut behind her with a heavy click. The cadet sat in silence for several seconds, then spoke from the back, voice low. "You've just been handed mercy," he said. "Don't waste it." That night no one laughed in the barracks. The usual jokes and chatter were gone. Blake sat on his bunk, staring at the floor. The image of his calm face haunted him. She could ruined him, could ended his career on the spot. But she hadn't. Instead, she'd chosen to teach. And somehow that made it worse. Because mercy from a Navy SEAL wasn't kindness. It was a warning. The next morning broke gray and cold over the base. Fog rolled across the training field, softening the sound of waves crashing in the distance. The cadets assembled at dawn, eyes heavy, faces tight. No one spoke. They all knew this wasn't going to be a regular training day. Lieutenant stood at the front, silent as stone. Her uniform was immaculate, her expression unreadable. In her hand, she held a single piece of rope, the same kind they'd used to tie her during the failed simulation. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. "Form up," she ordered. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried more weight than a shout. The cadets obeyed instantly, falling into line. The fog wrapped around them like a shroud. "Yesterday," she began, "you learned what happens when discipline fails. Today, you'll learn what happens when it holds." She tossed the rope onto the dirt. "You have 60 seconds to tie me up again. Proper knots, no mistakes, go." The cadets froze. Was this another test? No one dared ask. They rushed forward, surrounding her. Blake, the cadet who had pointed the gun, hesitated before stepping in, looked straight at him. "You too," she said. "You don't get to sit this one out." His stomach twisted. He knelt down, hands shaking as he tied the rope. Every loop, every pull he double-checked. No room for arrogance now. When they finished, tested the knots herself. "Better," she said, "but if this were real, you'd be dead. Start over." They untied and retied until their fingers burned. Each repetition grew faster, more precise. Watched, her gaze sharp, measuring every movement. After the fourth round, she stepped back. "Enough, now switch." The cadets looked at one another in confusion. "Ma'am," one asked. "Switch," she repeated. "Tie him up." She pointed at Blake. The group hesitated, then followed orders. In seconds, Blake was bound at the wrists, standing in the center like she had been. Walked slowly around him. "Yesterday," she said softly, "you were in control, you had the power. How's it feel now?" He didn't answer. "That's what combat is," she continued. "Control and chaos, constantly trading places. You never know which side you're on until it's too late, and if you lose focus for even a second." She yanked the rope tight. Blake winced. "You lose everything." The lesson was brutal but honest. Wasn't trying to humiliate him. She was rewiring his mind. The other cadets saw it, the way she dissected every flaw, every impulse, and turned it into discipline. She cut the rope and handed him the knife. "You're free. Now prove you learned something. You're leading today's field exercise." His head snapped up. "Ma'am, me." "Yes, you," she said. "You made the mistake. Now make the recovery." The group looked uneasy but didn't give him a choice. "You've got 30 minutes to plan a simulated extraction drill. Real tactics, no games." Blake nodded, adrenaline rushing back. He worked fast, mapping the terrain, assigning roles. Said nothing, simply watching. When the whistle blew, the cadets launched into action, crawling through mud, scaling barriers, and coordinating positions. Blake shouted commands with newfound focus. Halfway through the drill, one cadet slipped on wet sand. The entire formation began to crumble. Blake's instinct was to panic, but his voice cut through the chaos. "Hold your ground, breathe, think, then move." Her tone was calm but commanding, the same tone she'd used in real combat zones. Blake steadied his breathing, reorganized his team, and pulled them through. The extraction succeeded. Every cadet was panting, drenched, but alive in spirit. Approached him afterward. "That," she said, "is control. That's what you lost yesterday, and what you found again today." Blake looked at her, exhausted but grateful. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I'm sorry." Gave a faint nod. "Don't apologize, improve." The cadets gathered around, watching her in silence as she turned to leave. She stopped once, looked back, and said, "Lesson 2, strength isn't loud, it's steady." Then she walked off, her boots disappearing into the fog. That day, no one saw her as a woman trying to prove herself. They saw her for what she truly was, a warrior who'd already been tested by hell and refused to break. The next day dawned sharp and windless. The Pacific shimmered like molten steel behind the training field, and the air buzzed with quiet nerves. Today was live fire day, the moment every cadet either earned their instructor's respect or lost it forever. Lieutenant stood by the equipment rack, silent, scanning the horizon. Her expression was unreadable. The cadets had been different since the gun incident. There was no swagger now, no jokes, just tense respect. They followed orders fast, eyes alert, back straight. Still, saw the one thing that could destroy them faster than bullets: fear. Chief handed her the training roster. "You're running Squad 3, he said. "Same cadets from the last drill." His gaze flicked to Blake, the one who'd aimed the pistol. He froze under her eyes, then gave a small nod. She returned it with the faintest motion. No words, just acknowledgement. They assembled near the obstacle course, sand pits, mock buildings, and concrete walls marked for cover. The roar of gunfire from other squads echoed across the field. The smell of cordite filled the air. "Today isn't about speed," told them. "It's about clarity. You'll take fire from 3 directions. Your job: move, communicate, survive." The cadets nodded, faces pale beneath their helmets. The whistle blew. Instant chaos. Rounds cracked overhead, kicking sand into the air. Blake shouted commands, his voice hoarse but steady. "Cover left, move, move." Trailed them, watching their formation tighten under pressure. She didn't shout, she observed. Every movement revealed something about their minds. Who panicked? Who froze? Who led? Then halfway through the course, one cadet misfired. His weapon jammed. Instead of clearing it, he ducked behind cover, hands shaking. Saw it instantly. She barked, "Clear it." He fumbled, dropped the magazine, and froze. The sound of simulated enemy fire grew louder, closer. Panic spread fast, one mistake infecting the team like a virus. Didn't hesitate. She sprinted through the smoke, bullets whizzing past, and slid beside him. She didn't yell. She leaned close, calm and deliberate. "Look at me," she said, voice low. "You're not dying today. Clear your weapon, breathe, reset." His eyes locked onto hers. He took a breath, one, then another. His hands steadied. The jam cleared. "Good," she said. "Now move." They charged forward again, regrouping. Fear began to fade, replaced by focus. By the time they reached the extraction point, the entire squad was moving like one body, shouting commands, covering angles, breathing in rhythm. Called ceasefire. The field went silent except for the sound of waves crashing in the distance. The cadets lowered their rifles, drenched in sweat. Walked to the center, scanning them. Then, without warning, she kicked sand at Blake's boots. He stiffened. "Ma'am." "Fear," she said simply. "That's what almost killed, that's what gets soldiers buried." She paced in front of them, her voice cutting through the wind. "Fear is natural, panic is not. You can't control what scares you, but you can control how you stand in front of it." She looked directly at, "You froze, that's okay, you learned." Then her gaze moved to Blake. "And you led, that's what leadership looks like. You owned the mistake, you didn't point fingers." Blake swallowed hard. "I just did what you taught us, ma'am." Nodded once. "Then remember it, because out there mistakes cost lives and calm saves them." Chief approached, arms folded. He'd been watching from the tower. "Nicely done," he said quietly. "They're starting to get it." Looked at her cadets, exhausted but standing tall. "They will," she replied. "They're learning the same way I did through fire." As they left the field, the sun broke through the fog, casting long shadows behind them. Blake glanced back once, watching her silhouette against the ocean. He realized something then. She wasn't just training them to fight. She was training them to survive themselves. Night fell over the base like a heavy blanket. The day's gunfire still echoed faintly in every cadet's mind. The barracks, usually buzzing with jokes and late-night chatter, were eerily quiet. Boots were neatly lined against walls, helmets polished. The only sound was the low hum of ceiling fans and the restless shifting of guilt. Blake sat on his bunk, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. His body ached from the drills, but that wasn't what hurt. What hurt was the look in Lieutenant's eyes that morning, not anger, not disappointment, but something deeper. Pain. He couldn't shake it. Across the room whispered, "She's different, man. She doesn't yell, she doesn't need to." Blake didn't reply. He'd spent the last 2 nights replaying every second of the gun incident. The feel of the cold barrel, the silence after, the way she'd looked through him, it was carved into his memory. He'd nearly quit that night, packed his gear, ready to turn in his tag. But then he remembered something had said during their first briefing. The difference between quitting and surviving is what you do after you fail. So he stayed. The door suddenly opened. The sound of boots echoed. Everyone jumped to attention. Lieutenant stepped inside. Her presence filled the room instantly, calm, controlled, commanding. But tonight, something was different. She wasn't wearing her usual uniform, just simple fatigues and a quiet stare. "At ease," she said. The cadets relaxed, though their hearts didn't. She walked slowly between the bunks, hands behind her back. "I'm not here to lecture you," she began. "You've already learned more in 2 days than I could planned." She stopped near Blake's bunk. "But there's something you should understand about the kind of fear you toyed with." The room went still. She took a breath, her eyes drifting as if looking into another time. 3 years ago in Kandahar, my team was ambushed, 6 men under my command. We were outnumbered, pinned, and running low on ammo. Her voice was calm, but her tone carried weight, the kind that only comes from living what others can't imagine. "One of my men, Private Udd, took a round to the shoulder. I dragged him behind cover. That's when I felt it, the gun, pressed to my head, same way you did." She looked directly at Blake. He swallowed hard. "The man smiled before pulling the trigger," she continued. "Only it jammed." The barracks were silent, except for the faint buzz of the lights. "I killed him before he could try again," said flatly. But that moment stayed with me. Not the fear, the awareness. The awareness of how close life hangs by a thread when someone's careless. She turned, packing slowly. "So when you did that here, you didn't scare me. You reminded me of something I promised I'd never forget." Her gaze swept the room. "This uniform doesn't make me stronger than anyone else. It just means I've faced what most people run from. And that's why discipline matters, not for control, but for survival." No one dared blink. His voice softened slightly. "You'll all make mistakes. You'll all fail at something. But if you don't learn to respect the line between control and chaos, you won't last." She headed for the door, then stopped. "One more thing," she said quietly. "Tomorrow 400 beach drills, no excuses." The door shut behind her. For a long moment no one moved, then exhaled shakily. "She's been through hell." Blake nodded slowly, and still came back to train us. The cadets sat in silence for the rest of the night, the weight of her story pressing on every heart. No one slept much, not because of exhaustion, but because they finally understood who was leading them. Lieutenant wasn't just a SEAL. She was the embodiment of every lesson the Navy had ever tried to teach, and the proof that fear could be mastered, but never mocked. The Pacific roared like a living beast that morning. Waves crashed hard against the dark shoreline as the wind whipped across the sand. It was 4:00 a.m. sharp, pitch black except for the faint red glow of training lamps lining the beach. The cadets stood in formation, half-awake, boots sinking into wet sand. Cold salt water lapped at their ankles. No one dared speak. The ocean seemed to swallow sound itself. Then came the voice, low, steady, and cutting through the wind like steel. "Line up, eyes forward." Lieutenant stepped out of the shadows, her silhouette framed by the rising dawn. She wasn't holding a clipboard. She wasn't even wearing a jacket. Just a black tank, dog tags, and that same calm look that made even the toughest recruits straighten their backs. "Today," she said, "you're going to meet the version of yourselves that decides who you really are." The cadets exchanged nervous glances. She pointed toward the crashing surf. "Into the water, go." They hesitated. "Now," she barked. They sprinted, shouting as icy water swallowed them waist-deep. The cold hit like a shock to the lungs, knocking the breath from their chests. Blake gasped, his teeth chattering, stumbled but kept moving. "Lock arms," commanded. "Hold the line." They did, forming a trembling human chain against the current. Waves slammed into them, dragging at their legs. "Listen to me," shouted over the chaos. "That's fear you're feeling, that's weakness leaving your body. Every instinct tells you to run. You don't, you breathe, you stand. Her words cut through the roar. The cadets gritted their teeth, holding. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The water felt like knives, but no one broke. Finally blew her whistle, out of the surf. They stumbled onto the beach, drenched, shivering, barely able to stand. "Drop," she ordered. They fell into the sand. "Push-ups 50, go." The group groaned but obeyed. Each push-up sent sand grinding into their palms and dripping into their eyes. Blake's arms shook violently, collapsed beside him, coughing. Crouched near them, her voice steady. "You think this is about endurance? No, this is about what happens when everything in you screams stop. That's the moment when the real training begins." Her gaze swept over the squad. Because in the field there's no comfort, no warmth, no applause, there's just you and the choice to keep fighting. Then she pointed toward the dunes. "Run 2 miles full gear." They stared stunned. "Ma'am, we..." "Run." And they did. Sand sprayed behind them as the first light of dawn broke across the ocean. Every step burned. Their lungs felt like they were on fire, but something inside them shifted. They weren't running for her anymore. They were running for themselves. Followed silently, jogging behind them, her pace steady. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough to push them further. By the time they reached the finish line, the sun had broken over the horizon, painting the sky in gold. The cadets collapsed to their knees, gasping, faces streaked with sweat and grit. Stopped beside them. For a moment she said nothing, then quietly, "Look around you." They did. The ocean glistened behind them. Their boot prints stretched across the beach, proof of every moment they hadn't given up. "This," she said, "is what resilience looks like. Not strength, not skill, just refusal." Blake looked up at her, chest heaving. Why push us so far, ma'am?" Met his eyes. "Because one day you'll wish someone had pushed harder." Silence hung heavy. Then she turned, facing the ocean again. "You all did well today," she said, softer this time. "But remember, surviving isn't about the fight. It's about who you become after it." She walked toward the surf as the cadets watched, waves curling around her boots. The wind caught her dog tags, and for a fleeting second she looked less like an instructor and more like a ghost of every battle she'd ever fought. The next morning the base felt heavier. The air was thick with exhaustion, but also something deeper, tension. The beach drills had stripped every cadet down to raw nerves. Muscles ached, hands blistered, and silence had replaced the easy banter that once filled the halls. Blake sat on the barracks steps, staring at the horizon where the sun bled gold over the Pacific. He was drained but proud. For the first time, he felt he understood what Lieutenant had been trying to teach them. But not everyone did. Was sitting inside, head buried in his hands. His breaths came short, uneven. The night before, he hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the simulated gunfire, saw himself freezing under pressure. That failure looped in his mind like a broken record. When entered the barracks, she immediately sensed something off. The room was still, too still. She saw trembling, sweat rolling down his temple despite the morning chill. "Cadet," she said quietly. He didn't move. She stepped closer. "Look at me." He raised his eyes, red, unfocused, terrified. "Ma'am, I can't do this anymore," he stammered. "I'm not built for this. Every time the gunfire starts, I freeze. I can't breathe. I see things I shouldn't." The other cadets shifted uncomfortably, unsure if they should intervene. Blake opened his mouth but raised a hand. She crouched in front of her, voice steady. "What do you see?" He swallowed hard. "My brother, he died in Kabul. I was supposed to enlist with him. I didn't. He went alone." His voice cracked. "When I hear those sounds, it's like he's calling me." His eyes softened. The barracks disappeared around her, replaced by memories she'd buried deep. Dust, smoke, blood on desert sand. She'd seen that same look before in too many soldiers' eyes and in her own reflection. She took a slow breath. "Listen to me," she said, her tone lower, gentler. "You're not weak for feeling this. Fear isn't failure, it's memory, and memory means you care. But if you don't face it, it'll own you." He looked up, tears streaking his face. "How did you face it, ma'am, after everything?" The room froze. Everyone leaned in, waiting, hesitated for a heartbeat, then stood. "I didn't," she admitted, "not at first." The confession hit the room like a shockwave. "I buried it," she continued. "Every scream, every mistake, every man I couldn't save. I buried them so deep I thought I'd forgotten. But they never left. They just waited for moments like this." She walked to the window, staring at the waves beyond the compound fence. "One day, during a mission my best friend took a round meant for me. I carried her out myself. She didn't make it." The cadets were silent. Blake clenched his fist, jaw tight. Turned back, her voice trembling slightly now. "That night, I promised her I'd never let fear stop me from leading. That's why I'm here. That's why I push you, because one day you'll have someone depending on you too." Wiped his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. "What if I can't be that strong?" Stepped closer, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Strength isn't about never breaking. It's about breaking, then building yourself back again." She looked at the rest of them. "Every one of you will hit this point when your body's done, your mind's done, and your heart wants out. But that's the moment you decide who you really are." Her tone hardened again, commanding yet full of heart. "You don't quit, not here, not ever." Nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." "Good," she said. "Now get ready. We've got field evaluation in 2 hours." As she walked out, the cadets watched in silence. The legend of Lieutenant was no longer about her toughness. It was about her truth. Blake turned to and said quietly, "She doesn't just train us to fight. She trains us to live with what fighting costs." And for the first time smiled, tired but ready. The sun blazed over the training grounds, burning the mist off the ocean. Today wasn't an ordinary drill. It was the final evaluation, the one that decided who passed and who washed out. The cadets stood shoulder to shoulder, silent, faces streaked with sweat and resolve. Lieutenant stood before them, hands clasped behind her back. No clipboard, no notes, just the weight of weeks of pain, growth, and lessons carved into every scar on her soul. "This is it," she said. "Your last test. No simulations, no warnings, just instinct and control." A cold wind swept across the range. "Your mission: rescue a downed pilot behind enemy lines. You'll face obstacles, unexpected ones. Trust each other, trust your training. That's all you get." She stepped back, "Move out." The squad sprinted into the mock combat zone, a maze of walls, smoke, and live blanks. Blake led the front on comms, the others flanking left and right. The air was thick with adrenaline. Gunfire echoed. Explosions rumbled in the distance. They communicated like clockwork, cleaner than ever before. Weeks ago they were just cadets. Now they moved like soldiers. Then came the first twist. Smoke grenades detonated near their path. Visibility dropped to 0. The team froze, disoriented. Blake shouted, "Direction." "I lost signal," yelled back. Panic flirted at the edge of their minds. The disorienting sound of gunfire closed in. And then's voice crackled through their headsets, calm, controlled. "Breathe, focus on what you can see, not what you can't. Sound off, regroup." Her voice anchored them. They refocused, regrouped by sound instead of sight, using short, deliberate bursts of communication. Within minutes, they found cover behind a burnt-out Humvee. "Copy visual," Blake said. "Pilot likely north grid 50 meters." "Then move," said. The squad pushed forward through the chaos. Suddenly tripped a wire. A detonated, sending him sprawling backward. He screamed, clutching his ear. The team froze again. For a split second, Blake's instincts wavered. The sound of his own heartbeat drowned everything else. But then's words from the beach echoed in his mind. "Panic is a choice." He forced a breath, snapped into motion. Cover me. He dragged behind cover, checked him. You're okay, you hear me. Nodded weakly. Go finish it. Blake's eyes hardened. He moved forward, clearing corners, shouting commands, pushing his team through the final stretch. Through the smoke, they spotted the pilot, a mannequin weighted down in a trench. Blake called it in. Target secured. Then get him home, replied. They lifted the mannequin together, sprinting through the last gauntlet as simulated artillery thundered overhead. Every nerve screamed, every muscle begged to quit, but they didn't. They ran harder. When they finally crossed the extraction line, collapsing into the sand, the horns blared. Mission complete. For a moment, no one spoke, just the sound of labored breathing and the crash of waves nearby. Approached slowly, boots crunching in the sand. She looked down at them, covered in dirt, bruises, and exhaustion, yet standing taller than ever. You all passed, she said simply. The words hit harder than any explosion. Relief flooded their faces, followed by something deeper, pride. Struggled to his feet, saluted. Thank you, ma'am. Returned the salute, eyes glinting in the sunlight. No, she said softly. Thank yourselves, I just showed you who you were. Blake stepped forward, voice unsteady. Ma'am, about that day, the gun. Paused. The memory flickered in her eyes, the cold metal, the silence that followed. She nodded slowly. That day changed you, she said. Good, it was supposed to. He nodded back, understanding now what she meant all along. As the cadets stood facing the horizon, the ocean wind whipping around them, turned toward the sea one last time. Chief walked up beside her. They're ready, he said. They're more than ready, she replied. They're soldiers. She watched them laugh, a rare, raw sound of victory earned the hard way. For the first time in years, allowed herself to smile, not because they'd survived training, but because they'd learned the one truth every Navy SEAL carries into battle. Strength isn't about never fearing death. It's about learning to live after facing it. And as the camera of the mind slowly pulled back, ocean roaring, sun blazing, cadets standing proud, her voice would echo in the viewer's head, low and steady. Never threaten a Navy SEAL, especially one who's already survived everything you fear.